Hey everybody, I am back with another video. This one is kind of inspired by some synchronicities that I had Saturday, which kind of connects to some synchronicities I had a few months back, and really just a larger story of how a lot of these synchronicities that I have kind of build on each other and just ripple out. So it kind of begins several months back when I was watching or listening to a podcast, and they were talking about vampires and vampires in literature and film versus, real life immortals, and what's the deal with the blood and all of these things. Jesus as a vampire, all of these topics were being discussed, and Anne Rice obviously featured heavily in this conversation. The fact that she's from New Orleans and, vampire lore comes out of that area, or at least is in that area. It's all over the place. California, over in Europe, probably even in like China and pretty much everywhere. There's probably stories about vampiric type people. So that was kind of the essence of the podcast. And this Anne Rice thing where, she must have known possibly that there are real immortals, and she was sort of fictionalizing elements of that truth. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But Saturday morning, I'm sitting in bed and my wife comes in and says, "Did you know that Anne Rice died from complications from a stroke?" And I said, "No," but I wasn't even surprised at this point, because after I had listened to that podcast, we used this Randonautica app that we had gotten, and it took us to a point which was a house, and around the corner from that house, still in the circle, was this free library, one of those little houses made out of wood, the little door, and you put books in there and take them out. They're all over the place. And this one just happened to be right there in the radius. And inside of that were 3 books. Let me share here. These 3 books right here from Anne Rice. And so I thought, wow, what an amazing synchronicity. And it made me think, okay, there's something to this, right? There's more to this vampire thing than meets the eye. So this led me on this whole thing, looking into vampire stuff and really starting to consider these people really existing in some form or fashion, right? Whether or not it follows the fictionalized narrative of vampires doesn't really matter, but there's an underlying truth there, I felt, and I wanted to explore that more. So over the last couple months, I've been looking into this kind of stuff, and was even planning on doing a show with Michael on, this show on Netflix called Midnight Mass, which is sort of about vampirism, but in a different take, a different perspective. So they're looking at them as like angels and not vampires. But anyway, all of this stuff had been on my mind, and, this Randonautica app taking us to this particular location, finding these Anne Rice books, that wasn't the end of it, because the more we used the Randonautica app, every point that we would go to had one of these free libraries, either right there or, within the radius. And then we would always find books that corresponded to things we'd been talking about, or the intent that we had for that particular outing. And so this started to become a thing. These little free libraries began to take on this mystical meaning for us, that they're like these guideposts that we could use when we're exploring all of these different synchronicities. So we kept finding Anne Rice books after this initial incident. So the Anne Rice thing has been going on, and I've been wanting to read these books and really give them a chance. I never really got into that kind of fiction when I was younger, when these books were popular. And so I just never read Anne Rice, admittedly. But, now that I have these books, I do want to give them a read and see what's in there, read them with fresh eyes and a different perspective. So Saturday or Friday, I guess she died, and we wanted to take a walk down to one of the free libraries that's down the street from our house, because that is a place that many other synchronistic trails have begun. We found bones there sitting on this brick wall, and then a book in that particular little free library about bones. And then we started finding bones on hikes, and it just kind of went from there. And that place has done this several times. We found something or had an experience there, and it just led to further and further synchronicities. And we begin to see more and more of this stuff manifesting in our reality and the weeks and months that follow these trips down there. And so I was like, sure, well, let's go down there. Maybe we'll see an Anne Rice book, whatever. I had no expectations whatsoever. The other thing that had kind of been on my mind before, about a week or so, I think it was Ross Ben. I was listening to him talk about the upcoming 2022 predictions, like astrological outlook, and how the planet Jupiter was going to be playing a major role from the beginning of the year to probably June, and especially in April. And so all of this Jupiterian energy would be at play, very jovial and fun. And how I was going to use that energy and to propel myself in whatever it is I'm doing or working on before it starts to go retrograde. And there's a lot of planetary alignments that are going to be occurring and did occur. We got the eclipse, full moons, all of this stuff going on in this little span of time. And of course, last year we had the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. So I'm starting to think a lot about astrological alignments and these things and the energies that are at play. And so that's been on my mind, especially this Jupiterian energy that's coming. So we get down there to the park, and my wife goes straight to the free library, and I take Logan and we go around and we're planting seeds, and we go to sit on this wall where we had initially found these bones that, led off on that whole thing. And a woman comes over with a golden retriever, and the dog comes up to me and it starts licking my face, and I'm petting the dog. And I asked the woman what the dog's name is, and she said Jupiter. And I could have just lost it right there, just burst out laughing, because immediately I was like, that's such a perfect name for this dog. Look at the energy of this dog. It's very jovial and friendly. And so, I started talking to the dog and telling the dog, you got a great few months coming up next year. It's going to be your time to shine. And the woman looks at me like I'm crazy. And so Logan and I are just having a good time. And then my wife comes over, and I decide to go look at the books for myself. And she takes Logan off, and they meet somebody else who also has a little dog. And it turns out that dog's name is Phoebe. And she tells me this later. And I immediately think, like, isn't Phoebe a moon? I think it's a moon of Jupiter or Saturn. And then, so we found out it's a moon of Saturn, Phoebe. Let's see it. Yeah. So here's Jupiter. Here's Phoebe, this little asteroid rock thing. And here's one of the books my wife found was From Blood and Ash We Will Rise. And it's basically a book that lets you put book reviews. So each page is like another entry, like another book that you read and what it's about. Page counts, all kinds of stuff. So it's a pretty cool book. It's a leather-bound book with really interesting designs. And you got the moon here and wolves and dagger, all of this symbolism here. And so, they met this dog, Phoebe. She also found this book. And I should also preface this too. So before I met Jupiter, I was walking around and I picked up this rock that it's like kind of a translucent, milky quartz, very, very smooth. And it had like these little scars running across it, like on the moon from the little craters. So I just was thinking of it as my moon rock and was holding it in my hand. And then I looked up, and the moon, this is probably 11 or 12 in the afternoon, and the moon is out right above us, above our heads in the blue sky. So all this astrological stuff on my mind, thinking about Jupiter, picking up this moon rock, seeing the moon, going over, meeting a dog named Jupiter. And then my wife and Logan meet a dog named Phoebe, a moon of Saturn. And then she tells me she gets this book, The Moon, the Stars, and Madame Barova. And I don't know what this book is about, but inside of it is this card, a really nice card with Saturn in the four corners of the card, and what looks like the moon eclipsing the sun with the rays coming out. And inside is this, really long letter from a woman, I guess in Hong Kong, talking about how everyone is running around like they're in an F. Scott Fitzgerald book, dancing and partying with no meaning. She thinks it's a post-COVID culture. So, this is like a fairly recent card that was in this book. So you got the moon and the sun, the moon eclipsing the sun. You've got Saturn, the moon, the stars. So, combine that with this, with the moon, all of this stuff is just clicking, right? And it's very, very, it's minor stuff, but I wasn't expecting anything. And then every time we go down there, there always seems to be just some powerful chain of synchronicities that, begins to pop off. So I went to the free library, and I find this book, Cracking the Cube, Going Slow to Go Fast and Other Unexpected Turns in the World of Competitive Rubik's Cube Solving. And I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 76, but so, my formative years in the 80s as a child, the Rubik's Cube was a huge thing. I remember having at least several Rubik's Cubes because I would peel the stickers off because I could never get the fucking thing to go back. But I thought it was always just a toy. It was a gimmick thing. I never really would put it into the same category as, say, chess or Go. These really games that people just get so into it, and there's so many permutations and moves. And I guess I never really thought of the Rubik's Cube as something like that. But then I see this book, and I'm reading what this guy is saying about the Rubik's Cube. And, in my mind, I'm like, well, it was a toy. It was a fad back in the 80s. Does anybody really play with Rubik's Cubes anymore? So this is what really started leading me down this whole line of thinking, right? Because I started to wonder after I read this. So when Hungarian professor Erno Rubik invented the Rubik's Cube in 1974 out of wooden blocks, rubber bands, and paper clips, he didn't even know if it could be solved, let alone that it would become the world's most popular puzzle. Since its creation, the cube has become many things to many people. One of the best-selling children's toys of all time, a symbol of intellectual prowess, a frustrating puzzle with 43.2 quintillion possible permutations, and now a growing worldwide sport that is introducing the classic brain teaser to a new generation. And this book was written in 2016, by the way. So this is fairly recent. In Cracking the Cube, Ian Scheffler reveals that cubing isn't just fun and games. Along with participating in speed cubing competitions, from the World Championship to local tournaments, and interviewing key figures from the cube's history, he journeys to Budapest to seek a meeting with the legendary and notoriously reclusive Rubik, who is still tinkering away with puzzles in his 70s. So the guy that invented this thing is still alive. Getting sucked into the competitive circuit himself, Scheffler becomes engrossed in solving Rubik's Cube in under 20 seconds, the quasi-mystical barrier known as sub 20, which is to cubing what 4 minutes is to the mile, the difference between the best and everyone else. As Scheffler learns from the many gurus who cross his path, from pint-sized kids to engineering professors, it's not just about memorizing algorithms or even solving all 6 sides. It's about discovering how to solve yourself. I haven't read this book yet, but just from this little synopsis, I definitely think I'm going to give it a read, because I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things in there. But I wanted to start looking at the Rubik's Cube and just kind of thinking about, what was the Rubik's Cube? Was it just some game / toy that was a fad in the 80s and then just kind of stuck around all these years? There's plenty of knockoffs and other types of puzzles based off this design, but this was what started that whole craze. And it seems to be still around to this day and still very popular. And in fact, it's not just a game anymore. What this guy's talking about is like competitive speed cubing. It reminds me of chess tournaments or speed chess, where, these grandmasters are, playing at very quick speeds in between moves. And then you have that game Go, which has, those two games, chess and Go, are like some of the oldest games that we have still to this day. So they've lasted the test of time because of their ability to engage the player and to cause them to think moves ahead, to become like an algorithmic thinker, right? Almost being a predictive algorithm, trying to run simulations and permutations in your mind to determine the best possible move in order to defeat your opponent in the least amount of moves. So like, it really engages your brain in almost turning itself into a computer, right? Running algorithms to predict outcomes. So the Rubik's Cube seems to be in that kind of line, because there are in fact algorithms to solve this cube, and they're designed to get you to do it in 20 moves or less. And there is an algorithm that can solve the cube in 20 moves. And so the thing becomes like learning the algorithm and then being able to do it so fast that you can beat the sub 20, right? This quasi mystical barrier that people can't seem to break, solving the Rubik's Cube in under 20 seconds. So like, this is still a huge deal. And, interestingly enough, the more I look into the Rubik's Cube, the more fascinating it kind of becomes, and it ties into a lot of other things that were going on around the same time period that the Rubik's Cube came out. And so, this guy, he created this thing in the 70s. Let's see. Yeah, Erno Rubik created it in 74, patented in 75. So here's what I found interesting. He wasn't the first person to file a patent for a game like this, a puzzle. In 71, there were 2 other people in the United States who also filed patents for very similar designs for puzzle games. One guy had the cube design, but he was using magnets and he couldn't get them to stay together. So the fact that this guy, I think that was a 2x2 and his is a 3x3. And so with his, that added middle layer, he had these interlocking mechanisms that he developed. And so the fact is, though, that around this time, beginning in the early 70s, this idea was just out there in the ether. A design, right, for a puzzle, to solve a puzzle with colors on different sides. I mean, like, where do you even come up with something like that? How do 3 different people come up with very, very similar ideas or takes on this concept, right? It seems to me that was out there, either these guys access that somehow, like from my last video, I was talking about channeling, or, I know that there are these groups that get together in different cities to like triangulate themselves from each other. And then they meditate, and then they focus on an idea or a thought, and they put it out there, and it creates this like triangle, right? And it's reverberating out there into the ether. And then people start to pick up on it. Now, not everybody interprets it in the same way. I mean, 3 different people picked up on this relatively around the same time, right? Within several years of each other. They all picked up on this idea, developed, took materials, built a model of what was in their mind, what they were interpreting, right, as the idea that they'd had, and then they were patenting it. It just so happens that this guy's design was better, but he was by no means first. So, I mean, there's also that raises the question of, what is an idea? Where do they come from? And how do we access them? If they're just being put out there from some other intelligent source, then, how do we tap into them? And in what way do we relate them to, something like, how does that go? Did he see this cube in his mind? Or did he just have an idea and that information was there? And because he was resonating with that, it like came to him. He pulled it into himself because he was trying to solve an engineering problem to help his students. This is the story anyway. But whatever the truth is, I mean, I don't know. It just seems strange that 3 people would come up with this kind of idea at the same time. So he became famous for inventing this cube, and he's gone on to make several other cubes. There's this quote though from him, and I don't know, this really struck me. Space always intrigued me with its incredibly rich possibilities. Space alteration by architectural objects, transformation in space, sculpture, design, movement in space and in time, their correlation, their repercussion on mankind, the relation between man and space, the object and time. I think the cube arose from this interest, from this search for expression, and for this always more increased acuteness of these thoughts. So he's saying that the idea for this cube arose out of him thinking about all of the possibilities of space and time and our relationship to space and time, right? Architecture. And, it immediately made me think of these old ruins, these monuments and ruins and Tartarian buildings, could, like, being technology themselves, could they exist in different dimensions, the same building, being connected through space and time to other dimensions of space and time? So this is kind of the thing. This has been something that's intrigued me for a while now. And this guy's basically saying that him thinking about this kind of stuff is where he got the idea for this cube. So it sounds to me like he had some kind of an epiphany when he was thinking about this stuff. And it just like draws that information that's already out there in, or that it's already within him, and he's just manifesting it out. So anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting about this guy. He seems like a legitimate engineering professor. I mean, I don't really see him fitting some other role, or that, he really does seem like a guy who invented one thing. He had this epiphany and it took off. Now, why did it take off? That's a completely different story, because I don't think it was just because this guy made it that it became popular. The idea was there. Somebody wanted to capitalize on it because they saw the potential in it. But for what reason, right? Just to make money? That seems very reductive. in the 2010s, Rubik has recently spent much of his time working on Beyond Rubik's Cube, a science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM based exhibition, which would travel the globe over the next 6 years. So now he's getting into this STEM thing. I've been seeing this. STEM is becoming more and more pervasive and popular in the consciousness, in the culture. Schools are starting to implement STEM programs. And so it's interesting because STEM is more of like focusing on science, mathematics, engineering, robotics, these sciences, especially the ones that are going to probably get into coding and the internet, right? Because I think there's a focus on that kind of stuff within certain STEM programs. In the building that I work in, they put in a preschool that's a STEM preschool. So they want to start this at like the earliest possible age to start teaching a generation of children to be more attuned to mathematics and engineering and coding, right? Because look where we're going. Look where consciousness seems to be going. That's going to be kind of a necessary thing, like bringing up a whole generation of people that are just completely focused in on mechanical algorithmic thinking. And I can see the Rubik's Cube being something like that, right? Being used to program or to measure or train a brain to run algorithms and to become almost predictive in its working. Because the more the algorithm runs and runs simulations, right? The simulations are running to predict outcomes and to pick the best possible outcome or the next move, right? If you're twisting it, you want to be able to get the whole cube solved in the least amount of moves possible. And so, simulations and algorithms are designed to accomplish that. Algorithms grow out of the simulation, right? It's just telling you a sequence of events that need to take place for a desired outcome. And, people that mess with these Rubik's Cubes, I mean, that's just like these chess players that get so into chess that, they start memorizing games of other people that were played, and they know where every piece is on a board, and they could play multiple games at the same time. I mean, the brain gets to that level where it's almost like a computer, and that seems like a really cool thing. But at the same time, what do you have to sacrifice in order to train your brain in that way? Do you have to sacrifice nonlinear thinking? Do you have to sacrifice a sense of humor or mystical sense? I mean, I just don't see where there's room for mystery and mysticism in that kind of algorithmic thinking. So I don't know. I found that interesting about Erno Rubik and his Rubik Cube. And so STEM itself began in like the 90s, right? This push for STEM. And, it started out, it has a connection to DC. The Casey program, I guess, which was the first iteration of it, and started a summer program for talented underrepresented students in the DC area called the STEM Institute. So STEM is like connected to here. It seems like a program that's being initiated all over the United States and probably in other countries as well. Maybe not of the same name, but with the focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. So, because historically, America seems like they were never really that focused on these things. Like, it was always the narrative that China was just blowing us away, and Japan, and we were so focused on the arts and business and all of this other stuff. So another little interesting tidbit: Edward Snowden can solve a Rubik's Cube in 60 seconds. So, whatever that means, whatever this guy represents, he's kind of like that kind of a thinker, right? Data driven. In the 2016 film, the NSA contractor hides a jump drive containing secret files inside a Rubik's Cube, then talks his way past security to let the cube pass through the detectors without notice. Not sure if that's even true, or if that was just Hollywood taking liberty, but either way, here you have Snowden bragging that he can do a Rubik's Cube in 60 seconds, and the people that made the movie about him in Hollywood with Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing him, they decide to hide the data in a Rubik's Cube. Just another interesting thing. And then the Google Doodle, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Rubik's Cube invention, Google produced an interactive doodle for its users with a virtual Rubik's Cube that could be solved. Upon completion, the user would be presented with a certificate which stated their name and the time to complete the solve. The cube was only on the front page for one day. However, the doodle is still accessible if you don't get the chance to try it on the day. So it's actually still there. So Google got involved with the Rubik's Cube and the 40th anniversary. Snowden likes the Rubik's Cube. So the Rubik's Cube, and like, I didn't realize this, but it's like permeated throughout our culture. And it's always in very subtle ways. And the more I was reading about it, the more I was recalling, like, yeah, I have seen the Rubik's Cube show up in several things in the past that I've watched. Rubik's Cubes are used in numerous different ways in film and television series. It could be a device used to help the viewer relate to the character. Due to the popularity of the puzzle, it is a fairly reasonable assumption that the majority of the viewer base of an adult film would have grown up with the Rubik's Cube, regardless of the level of influence it had. It could also just be a simple background prop for a scene. However, the majority of uses of the Rubik's Cube within film are to portray the intelligence of a character in a way that everyone can understand. Due to the difficulty of the puzzle for those with no knowledge of the solution, the cube is widely accepted as something that only incredibly intelligent individuals are able to solve. Therefore, the use of the Rubik's Cube within media, such as the popular The Pursuit of Happiness, which was the one I remembered with Will Smith, where he did the Rubik's Cube really fast, is more of a theatrical device than simply a vague reference to a memorable object. But honestly, it does do that. They do use it to showcase the intelligence of one person over another. And it's usually a scene in a show or a movie where one guy's like, I don't know how to do this very well. And somebody comes along and they're like, here, and they just look at them like, you're amazing. But, they just memorized some algorithms, really. But, it's everywhere, like art, right? I found this article, I think it was in Smithsonian Online, and they were talking about the popularity of the Rubik's Cube in popular culture. So it's in art, music videos, architecture. I mean, look at this thing, right? Like Rubik's Cube inspired architecture. And we know what the inventor said about it. How architecture affects space and time and how people relate to that. I think he was hinting at, interdimensional travel or time travel, using architecture or certain types of formations, but he didn't really come out and say it, but it's sort of there. It was implied that he was thinking very deeply about these kind of things. And then you see, like these multi-dimensional blocks fitting together in different ways. I mean, it's just very interesting. Commercials, movies, this is just a sampling, right? Statues, these art pieces devoted to the Rubik's Cube. So I didn't realize just how pervasive and influential the Rubik's Cube has been on our culture. And, the more I really look at it, it starts to be more than just a game or a fad or a puzzle, right? It starts to represent something. It looks like we were training a generation of kids to grow up and think, along the lines of a computer. I mean, when I was a kid, other things were going on at the same time. And, the computers were already out before I was even born. They were already working on computers, like personal, smaller computers. Like computers have been around for a while, but the computers that we have today, like the early beginnings of that was going on, at least as far as we're told, in the 1970s. The Rubik's Cube has been symbolic and inspirational in many different art pieces, so much so that an entire art movement has been formed by the puzzle, Rubik's Cubism or Rubik Cubism. Like an entire art form came out of this. Very, very interesting to me. So yeah, the computer. Like, let's go through this timeline throughout the 1970s of what was going on in the world of technology as it relates to, the computer. Because, I'm going to try to tie the Rubik's Cube into this. I'm painting a picture here. I'm creating a narrative, if you will. So, like, I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is just 1970 to 1972. Excuse me. And you can see all the stuff that's going on. Texas Instruments releases the first easily portable calculator, 8-inch floppy disk introduced. Atari, founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. So I remember having an Atari and a Commodore computer when I was a kid, and some guy my mom was dating, I'm pretty sure he was like NSA or CIA. I can't prove that, but he did bug our apartment and had access to a lot of cutting edge technology that was just coming out on the market. So to sort of get in my mom's good graces, he would buy me an Atari and a Commodore computer. Yay me. So I remember the Atari. It was founded in 72. Pong was released in 72. Widely recognized as the first popular arcade video game. It was invented by Alan Alcom. So video games were starting to become popular, like video arcades, the old video arcades, before you had like the personal units in the home with like the personal computer. So computers built after 1972 are often called fourth generation computers, based on large-scale integration of circuits, such as microprocessors, typically 500 or more components on a chip. So they're starting to make things smaller and more compact. Programming language C, developed at the Bell Laboratories in the US. I could probably do a whole video just on Bell Lab and their connection to all kinds of weird stuff that's going on in West Virginia, Bell helicopter, all the weird, crazy, supernatural stuff that goes on in the Ohio River Valley. But that's where you get your programming language C. It's from Bell Labs. Dennis Ritchie, one of the inventors of the Unix operating system, simplifies BCPL into a language he calls B, then iterates B into C. It is a very popular language, especially for systems programming, as it is flexible and fast. C was considered a refreshing change in the computing field because it helped introduce structured programming inspired by C. C++ was introduced in the 1980s and in turn helped usher in the era of the object-oriented programming. So like this is crucial to what we have today, right? So like this is what I'm saying. The 1970s was the decade where all of the development and all of the production and stuff and the commercialization was beginning for what we have now, the technology we're seeing. And 72, the first international connections to ARPANET are established. ARPANET later became the basis for what is now called the internet. Well, we all know that, but 1972, this is going down. I'm not even born yet. There's a bunch of other stuff in here. Ethernet developed. This became a popular way of connecting PCs and other computers together. So Ethernet's coming out 73. Motorola announces a microprocessor. Let's see. Olivetti released the personal computer, Olivetti P6060, the first with the integrated floppy disk drive. Trying to find, let's see, here we go. Bill Gates, he's in here somewhere. IBM releases the 5100 computer with integrated keyboard display and mass storage on tape. It resembles the personal computers of a few years later, although it does not use a microprocessor. So that's what, 75. Yeah. I mean, things are just rolling along. First laser printer introduced by IBM, Intel chip, Cray 1 supercomputer was invented by Seymour Cray. He left Control Data in 72 to form his own company. This machine was known as much for its horseshoe-shaped design as it was for being the first supercomputer to make vector processing practical. So now, we're getting into more like, really high-tech processing. Commodore introduces the Commodore PET, 4 kilobytes or 8 kilobytes of RAM. Nice. There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. Ken Olsen, founder, president, and chairman of Digital Equipment Corporation. I mean, the guy was probably onto something, just warning people. 1977. Apple II was introduced. Just on and on it goes, right? And then finally down here, Atari releases the Atari 400-800, a high-performance game-oriented home computer based on the 6502 microprocessor. So I remember having the Atari, and so I'm like, there's other things that were going on around this time, the Rubik's Cube, the Atari, video games in general. But I remember several other things that were popularized in the mid to late 70s and early 80s. And so this is really like what I started to begin to see was that this is all just programming the minds of the future, right? This popular culture stuff is preparing generationally the minds of people for this inevitable singularity, the merging of man and machine, cyborgs, AI, androids. We all see where this stuff is going, but we can keep looking back. I mean, this is just a snapshot, of all of the programming that was going on in the 1970s, and the 1980s, and the 1990s, and onward, but really the 70s and 80s were where the groundwork was being laid for these ideas. And it was always geared towards kids, games, movies. I remember, well, I'm going to talk about it here, but choose your own adventure books. Now, this seems sort of ubiquitous, right? It's not a big deal. Choose your own adventure books, though, were huge for me in the 80s. I read a ton of these different books. And so this came out in 1976. with the publication of Adventures of You series, starting with Packard's Sugarcane Island in 1976. So the year I was born, this whole choose your own adventure thing starts. And it's like gamifying reality, right? And this, you could say this was a fad, but it wasn't, because as you're gonna see, it's permeating through our culture today. The gamification of reality is really what this is all about, right? Is this game theory on a grand scale, getting people to engage reality like a game, with this algorithmic mindset to solve problems and win prizes. I mean, that's a lot of what we see is problem solving to win prizes. Like all the little games, Candy Crush, and all of these little puzzle games you can get on your phone, and maybe win a little coins and whatever. All of this stuff is training the brain to just think in this gamified way. Who is this guy? Edward Packard. And so he goes on to create this extremely popular series of children's books, Choose Your Own Adventure. And then I found this article: Is the future of entertainment the 40-year-old Choose Your Own Adventure series? And so they're making the same argument that I am in a way, right? They're making the connection between our popular culture and things of like the 70s and 80s. To kids immersed in video games, the thrill of taking part in the action is a given, whether skydiving out of a flying bus in Fortnite or building a new world in Minecraft. But the ability to interact with a story was pioneered decades ago. In a pulp paperback that morphed into a best-selling series in the 1980s, is becoming a hit once again. Bantam Books' Choose Your Own Adventure series debuted 40 years ago with The Cave of Time, which is this book here, a fantastic adventure in which the main character, you, controls the plot. At the bottom of many pages, you face a choice. Will you seek shelter? Turn to page 6. Or will you brave the freezing wind to see more of the world about you? Page 16. The decisions can put you in a lifeboat alongside the Titanic, the dungeon of a medieval castle, or the time of the dinosaurs. There are 40 possible endings, 10 are catastrophically bad. But now we're seeing that this is starting to become popular yet again. In many ways, the Choose Your Own Adventure series was an analog predecessor of the modern video game, says Derek Ballew, director of literary arts at Canada's Banff Centre, who created a college course on the genre. Oh, we got to have a college course to study this. But it's fascinating, right, that this is basically the same idea, just in a digital format. You can find the latest take on the idea on Amazon's smart speaker, Alexa, take me to the Himalayas to find the abominable snowman, and on Netflix's Black Mirror Bandersnatch, which can run for 40 minutes or more than twice that long, depending on your choices. And 20th Century Fox is hoping to produce Choose Your Own Adventure films with theatergoers directing the plot via smartphones. And they already have that Bear Grylls guy running all over. He has a show where, Logan loves this show. He likes to choose where he's going to go. And, so it affects the outcome. So obviously all of the outcomes have to be filmed ahead of time. And then the viewer just picks one. And then it leads you off on another series of decisions. So this is becoming popular again for some reason, right? Obviously there's a purpose behind this. So this, again, with the Rubik's Cube and the speed cubing and the algorithmic brain, I'm thinking like all of this stuff has to be connected, right? And so Atari, we all remember Atari. 1972, Atari came out. Founded in Sunnyvale, California by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. The name, here's the interesting part that I found about Atari. The name comes from the Japanese term Atari, used while playing the ancient Japanese board game Go. Go figure, right? What are the chances? The word ataru means to hit a target in Japanese and is associated with good fortune, while Atari means about to win, like checkmate in chess. So here, Atari is now connecting itself to the game of chess or the game of Go. Again, two very like intellectual games. The Atari logo was designed by George Opperman, who was Atari's first in-house graphic designer and drawn by Evelyn Seto. The design is known as Fuji for its resemblance to the Japanese mountain. Although the logo's origins are unrelated to it, Opperman designed the logo intending for the silhouette to look like the letter A, as in Atari, and for its three prongs to resemble players and the midline of the court in the company's first hit game, Pong. So again, you know, that sounds like complete bullshit to me. But because why would you make that the logo and not use it as the, anyway, you see what I'm saying? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So the fact that it's like Mount Fuji, that has more significance to me. I think that's probably closer to the truth. Just interesting that they're making the connection between this video game company, like the name of the company, and, you know, the game Go and the game chess. So here, and then this happens, right? As I'm looking into this, in 1971, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded a small engineering company, Syzygy Engineering, that designed Computer Space, the world's first commercially available arcade video game for nutting associates. The two incorporated Atari Inc. and soon hired Alcorn as their first design engineer. Bushnell asked Alcon to produce an arcade version of the Magnavox Odyssey's tennis game, which would be named Pong. See, tennis, I've talked about tennis before being another one of these games that, like, there's more to tennis than people might imagine. It's all about angles and geometry. There's so much to tennis. So it's interesting that was the first game that they wanted to make was Pong. But, you know, it's just, it's such a basic game. Boop, boop, boop. I mean, you're just a bar and a ball. While Bushnell incorporated Atari in June 72, Syzygy Company was never formally incorporated. Before Atari's incorporation, Bushnell considered various terms from the game Go, eventually choosing Atari. So he's already looking at the game Go for names for his company, even though they had a name, Syzygy, right? So Atari was incorporated in California in 72. They had a guy that lived next door, Nolan's next door neighbor, Joe Keenan. He created Key Games and worked with them. They were bought out, or they were sold to Warner Communication in 1976 for $28 to $32 million. I mean, wow. The introductory price was $199 for the 2600. Yeah, wait. The introductory, I guess it was the 5200 or the 2600. Anyway, it was $199 when it was released. That would have been like $905 in 2020. I mean, I don't even think the Xboxes and PlayStations, the brand new ones that come out, cost $905. So you can imagine, like, that was really expensive for that time to charge that much money. Like, why? I don't know why it was that expensive. I don't know how much it actually cost them to produce this thing. But you got a console, 2 joysticks, pair of paddles, and the combat game cartridge. But eventually they got bought by Warner Communications. and they used part of the money to buy the Folgers mansion. Why they had to put that in here, I have no idea. So he didn't like the way they were running it. But I thought it was interesting that syzygy comes up, right? Because I had done a video about the OA, and in the OA, there is a place called syzygy. This is the screenshot of the sign, right? And this was a place, well, in the context of the OA season 2, syzygy is the answer to the Symphony Q clue, Three Wise Men, that private investigator Kareem Washington is trying to crack in his hunt for missing girl Michelle Vu, who has traveled into another dimension through the rose window. So syzygy is the answer to this alternate reality game that these kids are playing on their phones, where they have to solve clues, right, to win prizes, which basically is to get to the house with the rose window and find access to other dimensions. But one of the main characters' boyfriends is running this place, and he's also, I think, the one that's putting out the game, and he's crowdsourcing to solve problems, right? Because he's working on something else, and he's using people to crowdsource his number crunching and his problem solving. So again, it's like making somebody do a Rubik's Cube in 20 seconds or less. I mean, like, this is all training people, but I find it interesting that syzygy actually, in astronomy, a conjunction or opposition, especially of the moon with the sun, a pair of connected or corresponding things. Perigee is the point at which the moon is closest in its orbit to the Earth, and syzygy is when the Earth, the moon, and the sun are aligned, which happens at every full moon or new moon. So again, with the moon stuff, coming right back to me from my little walk that I took, it just always seems to happen that way. So, the Atari being sort of the name Atari taken from the game Go, and the game Go tied to the Rubik's Cube, and Transformers was another big thing when I was a kid in the 80s. Another Japanese toy that came out, 1984. Yeah. So it began in 84 with the toys, and they had, of course, the cartoons, they've had movies. It's like a whole franchise thing. That's still going. The Transformer thing, still going. Rubik's Cube thing, still going. Atari, not so much, but video games obviously are still hugely popular. So all of these major things that were developed in the 70s, popularized in the 80s, are still popular today or coming back into popularity today. And they're all happening around all of this other technological stuff that's going on right now. So, I mean, this is just a show about sentient robots changing into, other things. So like the Rubik's Cube is turning and transforming, right? The Transformer in and of itself as a toy was a lot like a puzzle, right? In order to transform it into the thing that it could turn into, or vice versa, you kind of had to learn how to move the parts and put them together like a little puzzle piece, right? Because you have like the cab of a truck can turn into like this robot guy. I'm not saying it's extremely difficult, but it still had that same process behind it, right? It was engaging the mind to solve a puzzle. So I just wanted to throw out there that Transformers coming out in 84 was a huge part of my childhood. I love Transformers. So where am I going with this? Well, we had some other things that were also going on in the 1980s. This movie, Rain Man, I think most people are familiar with this movie, but it's an American road drama film directed by Barry Levinson from a screenplay written by Barry Morrow. It's basically about a guy, Charlie Babbitt, who discovers, well, it's about a guy with autism, okay, played by Dustin Hoffman. But it was written by this guy, Barry Morrow, and it was based off of real people. It says here, Morrow created the character of Raymond after meeting Kim Peek, a real-life savant. His characterization was based on both Peek and Bill Sachter, a good friend of Morrow, who was the subject of Bill, a movie he did in 1981, an earlier film. So, like, this guy, Ray, in Rain Man, was based off of not one, but two different people that Barry Morrow himself knew or had met, right? And so the first one, I just wanted to look into these guys, right? Because this is kind of where I'm going with all of this. This is just another part of the layer to all of the programming for where we're headed. So Kim Peek, this is Kim Peek right here, right? He was born 11/11/1951, and he died in 2009. They call him an American savant, or a mega savant. He had an exceptional memory, but he also experienced social difficulties, possibly resulting from a developmental disability related to congenital brain abnormalities. He was the inspiration for the character Raymond Babbitt in the 1988 movie Rain Man. Although Peek was previously diagnosed with autism, he is now thought to have had FG syndrome. So I found that interesting that this guy wasn't even really autistic. He was suffering from some other sort of brain growth abnormality that allowed him to have more memory than most people. Speculation that his neurons made unusual connections due to the absence of a corpus callosum, resulting in an increased memory capacity, right? They're talking about his brain like, you know, it's a storage drive. According to Peek's father, Fran, Kim was able to memorize things from the age of 16 to 20 months. He read books, memorized them, and then placed them upside down on the shelf to show that he had finished reading them, a practice he maintained all his life. He could speed through a book in about an hour and remember almost everything he had read, memorizing vast amounts of information in subjects ranging from history and literature, geography and numbers to sports, music, and dates. Peek read by scanning the left page with his left eye while reading the right page with his right eye. I mean, amazing. That's absolutely amazing. According to an article in the Times newspaper, he could accurately recall the contents of at least 12,000 books. He lived in Murray, Utah, most of his life. He could be found at the Salt Lake City Library and demonstrating his capabilities at schools with great help from his father. So, you know, he went around and he was showcasing his talents. Get this, though, NASA liked this guy, too. 2004, scientists at the Center for Bioinformatics Space Life Sciences at the NASA Ames Research Center examined Peek with a series of tests, including computed tomography scans and magnetic resonance imaging. The intent was to create a three-dimensional view of his brain structure and to compare the images to MRI scans performed in 1988. These were the first tentative approaches in using non-invasive technology to further investigate Kim's savant abilities. So, I mean, this guy really wasn't autistic. You know, he had some sort of abnormality, but I guess his savant abilities was, you know, it sparked interest by NASA and this director to, you know, make the movie Rain Man. The other guy was Bill Sachter. He was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1913, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants who ran a grocery store. When he was 7 years old, his father died from complications of the Spanish flu. Yes, there it is again. It was 1920. Bill was having difficulty learning in school, and after taking a mandatory intelligence test, he was classified as subnormal. The state of Minnesota determined that he would be a burden on society, so he was placed in the Faribault State School for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Sachter never again saw his mother or two older sisters, Sarah and Alice, remaining there for the next 44 years. He was diagnosed as intellectually disabled, although diagnoses performed decades later would prove his intelligence was near normal. He was never taught to read or write or even how to use a telephone. In 1964, when new light was being shed on the treatment of the mentally ill and disabled, Sachter was moved to a halfway house and worked odd jobs to support himself. He eventually became a handyman at the Minnetonka Club, where Barry Morrow, a filmmaker, and his wife Bev befriended him. So this is a golf club. It's a country club. So this guy is working as a handyman, and this guy is, I guess, a member of this club. Anyway, they run into him. Morrow began slowly to make life a bit more comfortable for Bill, getting him new dentures and becoming his friend. Morrow became his guardian, and when he took a post at the University of Iowa, Sachter followed him to Iowa City and became the sole proprietor of Wild Bill's coffee shop on the campus, in which he excelled. So I don't know. I mean, that's really weird, right? That you're a movie director in Hollywood, and you meet this guy at a country club, and he's the handyman, and he's mentally handicapped, and you just start buying him dentures, and then eventually like set him up in Iowa where you are. Something else was going on there, right? I think he was probably taking advantage of him in some way and using him. Obviously he made a movie about him, and then he used some of his traits for the character in Rain Man. So he was named Handicap Iowan of the Year in 1976, attending a ceremony in DC. Jimmy Carter gave him a special recognition in 1979. Mickey Rooney played him. And Mickey Rooney won a Golden Globe Award and an Emmy Award. And I'm pretty sure Cruise and Dustin Hoffman won an award for Rain Man. So like already the movies are being put out there. They're being given all the prestigious awards with all of the big actors of the time. Why? Because people with I mean, neither of these two guys was autistic, right? I mean, they had disabilities, but I don't even know if this guy was even a savant or not. They put him in a home, and his brain worked fine. So I don't even know that he just displayed any of those traits, like the other guy did, where he could memorize books. So it's a wonder, like, why did this director take so much interest in this guy and make a movie about him, and then they give the awards to the actor who was in the movie to promote it and make everyone want to go to watch it. So like this autism thing was a big, normalizing it, seeing the virtue in it, like the ability to calculate things. But what else has been going on, right? To really cause a lot of that 178% increase since 2000. I just found this online. But look, 1970, when we started this whole thing with the computers and the Rubik's Cube and all of that stuff that was going on, this is 1 in 10,000 people, right? And so every single year it's begun to go up and up, and then it started climbing even higher and higher. And now it's 1 in 54 as of 2016, or no, CDC reported in 2020, it's 1 in 54, right? So now we have people who are just more and more having these traits. In fact, autism became something that was a spectrum now. At one time, it was just a diagnosis, you're autistic, but then it became a spectrum because people reacted differently, that, they were more sociable and less sociable. Like there were, a scale of how they handled other people and could function in society with other people. And so you had some highly functional people that did show some of these traits, right? But my thing is, I'm looking at autism and I'm looking at that spectrum, right? And this now ability to focus in on information and just like processing information, and sort of lack a lot of the empathy and compassion that other people have or display. And that's something that people, not that they don't care, but they just don't know how to express emotion. They don't handle emotion well. And in a way, it makes sense because emotion isn't logical, right? It doesn't really compute. It's illogical and irrational. And your mind is like a computer. It's like solving complex algorithmic problems in mathematics. But there's a disconnect, I think, in the emotional department. And of course, to correlate with this, I just throw this up here. We've all seen these, like 62, we're talking 3, 83, you're up to 24. So now you're getting into the 80s, right? You're starting to see by 2018, it's 76. So these things are playing a role, right? The Rubik's Cube, the video games, the Atari, right? The toys, the merging of man and machine, the ideas have been there. The training of the mind has been there. The whole program has been running probably even back before the 70s, but that's just as far as I wanted to take it back today. And like I said, this all just came out of going on a walk to the park and finding some books. So, my conclusions from this. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing. So I just started last night, before I even put all this together today. I'm watching this show, Dr. Brain, on Apple. And it's basically about a guy who is born autistic and his mother kills herself, and he's left to be raised by scientists who are studying his brain because he has perfect recall and he can go into a memory and tell you every little detail, license plates, what the temperature felt like, everything, because he's not even emotionally connected to the event. So he's able to go into his memory and look at it like still frames. And he invents this thing to transfer somebody's memories from one person to another, but one person has to have been dead and not for very long, so he can absorb their memories, right? But there's a scene when he's a kid and he's being examined by these scientists that they have him doing a Rubik's Cube. I just thought, there you go, right? So making the connection again between like autism and priming the brain or preparing the brain to be more compatible with technology, to be already in like an algorithmic state devoid of emotion, right? Just crunching data. Because like when you're in the metaverse, I mean, I don't think people really know that it's not going to be like whatever they think it's going to be like. It's probably not going to be like that, right? For some reason, they're trying to get people's brains to be more interactive with the technology that's coming and that's been coming and that's here now. And where they want to go with all of this, I don't know exactly, but this definitely plays a part in that, right? This here and this result here, but all of this other stuff is really a part of that, the training of the mind into this computer, basically. But like I said, just go out and take a walk. And this is how this happens for me. So I don't know. Let me stop sharing. I mean, I just try to go out and have no expectations and I find things and I follow it. So this is probably going to continue to ripple out, this Rubik's Cube thing and all of the other things that I'm remembering from childhood and looking into, that all seem to be connecting to one another, to this narrative that I'm creating for myself about what's going on. Anyway, I hope you guys found this enjoyable, informative, helpful, and I hope it sparks synchronicities for other people. And I will see you next time.